Beware, beware, there are things in the dark. They freeze your skin, they burn your bones. But if your dreams are worth going that far, find the morning star, she'll grant you one. 3 wishes to the light bringer. Price and prize come in pairs. One is free, one is fair. On the 3rd, you'll be hers. The old nursery rhyme repeated in my head as I washed my hands and face with an earnestness that bordered fury. It was an old favorite around here called Lucy's Song. It's from long before I started working here. The worst thing about it, though, was how catchy it was. At the moment, it was stuck in my head, and the last thing I wanted was to start a night shift through those old corridors while having a creepy tune about things in the dark as my background music. Things had been slowly spiraling out of control, and by then I found myself closer to a mental breakdown than I cared to admit. The pandemic had only made it worse, too, and when I looked in the mirror above the sink, my eyes were red. I looked like I'd been crying myself raw for a long while, but the truth was a lot less dramatic than that. 5 minutes from then, I'd be awake for 33 hours straight. It was a new record in my terribly insomniac life, pulling all-nighters at the hospital. I'll preface this by saying I'm not a doctor. I'm part of the night shift security staff, and my job, similarly to that of a glorified mall cop, is half doing rounds through the corridors and half just sitting in the security room watching the camera feed. As such, up until somewhat recently, I spent most of my work hours bored out of my mind, daydreaming of home and vacations with my fiancé. Work at Greenhaven Institute is a tad different from your usual hospital job. The security personnel are considered essential workers, but we already were labeled as such long before the pandemic hit. As things are now, we're pretty understaffed, and if they could legally keep me on duty 24/7, I'm fairly sure they'd do that. As of right then, I still had 1 hour before my break ended, and I'd be clocking back in. With nothing better to do until then, I went to get a cup of tea and whatever meal my dysregulated biological clock fancied best. The break room is this tiny cafeteria that had been set aside when a larger eating space was added during the last time the building was renovated. Nowadays, it's only open for staff use. Due to the hour, I didn't expect to see anyone else around, but wasn't too surprised to see 2 other people behind the counter, picking things off the shelves and sliding something into the microwave. "You don't need to fetch stuff for me. I'm not a kid anymore." "No, but you're short," I snorted at the retort, catching the end of their conversation. Angie's eyes followed me as I walked toward them, puffing her cheeks and looking as miffed as I was amused. The coat of warm freckles crossing her nose made it look like she was sprinkled with cinnamon, clashing with the pale braid running down her back. Marie Antoinette syndrome. It's when someone's hair suddenly turns white. In myth, it's associated to extreme stress or trauma, but actually tends to have other causes like immunological problems or nutrient deficiencies and such. On Angie's case, though, I do think stress played a part in it. In contrast, her cousin Alex is all warm skin and friendly smiles, that faint Brazilian accent slipping into his speech as he greets me. "Hey, Law, already working again?" "Soon. My shift starts in an hour," I replied with a sigh while turning the kettle on, and he handed me the mug with my name on it. Use of the break room equipment was one of the staff perks, and I'd chided them more times than I can count. But truth is, as long as they didn't break anything, nobody even noticed. Angie pushed a grilled cheese sandwich in my direction. "Eat something solid, too, geez." The 3 of us sat by the window, but I made a point to ignore the figures standing in a circle on the patio outside. We were too high up for them to notice us anyway. My head hurt a little, and I wondered if I had enough time to take a nap. My phone told me I had 45 minutes before my next shift. If I slept now, I'd not be awake enough to work later. I sighed, pulled my mask down to eat, and told myself the only thing I heard outside was the rain and wind whistling, and that I didn't see hints of a nun's garb in the middle of the strange congregation. It's hard to swallow food nowadays. I've been too stressed and tired to build up an appetite, but Angie was right, and I knew it. Everyone has to eat. Lily wants to lower my dose of fentanyl, Alex mumbled between forkfuls of his microwaved lasagna. Wants being the key word here. Would be nice if it goes okay, but she doesn't get what chronic pain is like. It just doesn't up and poofs. There's one here. I glanced away from my sandwich, not really needing to ask what he was on about. You can smell them before you see them. Iron, smoke, and something burnt. The air grew colder as the angel approached, until finally appearing behind the door. It looked like a broken doll, almost. Tall enough to need to bend over to walk in long, tattered robes and pieces of what was once armor now fused to its flesh. A single loop of bone protruded from behind its ears and circled around the head like a hallowed crown. A Grigori. It approached our table with clunky steps, fingers the color of aspen bark extended to inspect me. I tried not to frown at the smell, not to react at all, and ignore the noise of ceramic and metal grinding as it brought its face a tad too close to my own. I told myself I still had almost an hour. Its breath felt like cobwebs on my neck, hissing through the slits on its mask. Its old mottled tunic rustled against my side, leaving hints of frost on my uniform in the middle of May. I took in small, slow breaths and forced myself to chew my sandwich. Don't look. They won't hurt you if you don't react to them. I kept my face level and looked straight past the thing. To my left, Angie was breathing a little too hard, but looked deeply enthralled by my iPhone wallpaper. It worked. The angel gurgled something between bored or disappointed and turned from us to Alex, who kept blissfully chewing his microwave meal like it was heaven-sent ambrosia. "Children, wander, wander, wander. Just come home, don't be afraid." Then it brought its own face closer again and grabbed Alex's neck. "You're cooling my food, you dumbass pigeon." He flipped the fork in his grip and shoved it through the eye slits in the angel's mask to get it to back off. It reared backward and half-turned, sharp nails leaving talon-like marks where they grabbed him. I feel kind of bad for him sometimes. There's something about him or some reason that the ignoring tactic doesn't work. The things around must have some vendetta against him. The angel recovered from its surprised stupor and lunged forward again, trying to claw at his chest, fork still sticking out of the eye hole. "Law, a little hand here, please? I'm not on duty. Law!" I should still have 20 minutes before work. I haven't slept in over a day. I'm so tired. But the angel didn't care. I groaned and stood up to help. Alex ran behind the counter, and Angie had started slamming everything atop our table against the creature's head. It wasn't looking hurt, but she was keeping it distracted enough to stop moving, which was helpful. I aimed my work baton at the back of its neck, where the armor didn't cover. It felt like hitting a tree, but it went down with a dull thud, then shifted around, skittering like a centipede, and tried to tackle me instead. Fine. I was getting ticked off enough by these things that punching one might actually help me feel better. I tackled it down in a one-arm chokehold, or as best as I could while squirming along it on the ground, my other fist hitting anywhere I could reach while I did my best impression of a rabid koala. The cold was starting to seep into my clothes enough to feel warm instead. Not good. Hypothermia sucks. Get off! Alex came back holding Eddie's entire cheese knives collection between his fingers like some sort of gourmet ninja, and I barely had time to roll off the angel before he lunged to stab it. It took longer than it should have for it to end. The angel still writhed on the floor, pinned down and so irreparably broken. A pair of cheese knives sunk into its chest, and 4 more scattered on the floor with blades covered in the thing's blackish blood. I'm so sorry, Eddie, my love. I think they may still be usable if you wash them. Probably. But it just wouldn't stop talking. Silver spawn fruit of the traitor. I'll break, you bring father back. For all that was good and holy, this was a headache. Literally, its voice rung in my skull like a church bell. I felt almost relieved when Angie fetched a couple serrated knives and we could start sawing off the halo. The moment that loop of bone got fully detached, the thing just stopped and fell limp, like flipping off a switch. Creeps me out every time, but my taser doesn't work on any angel bigger than a cherub, and riddling them with holes just slows them down. If you want them to die, the halo has to go. I wish there was an easier way. Guys, Angie whispered, peeking through the break room's exit and frowning. There are more down the hall. How many? 3. Fuck. Alex added to our conversation. We made our way out very, very slowly. I pushed the brim of my glasses up, keeping my breathing steady and silent, and peeked out to check the area ahead. We repeated that course of action at every turn and intersection, at times hiding in one room or another for a few minutes while waiting for the area to clear. My job is to deal with those things, to keep the patients and visitors safe. Ideally, the security would be keeping the angels off the hospital altogether, even if the altogether usually excluded the morgue and the old wing. But with them already roaming the halls, and considering one had reached the break room of all places, the best course of action I could think of was to take Angie and her family with me to the security room, check the perimeter through the cameras, and then go wherever seemed safer. We could do a round through the apartment units and cross the reception to reach the elevators, or get there in half the time taking a shortcut through the old wing at the back. I made a mental note of the lights flickering next to room 18, reminding myself to mention it next staff meeting. It should stay off or on, not both at the same time. The old patio was dark, as expected, but the night was fresh when we reached that part of the building. My path was cleared by moonlight and the light of my torch climbing the walls. I hummed to calm my own nerves and made a point to not pay attention to the group in a circle up ahead. There seemed to be more of them gathered there than usual, too, but hard to say for sure. It's not like I ever counted them. Lord, please, mercy. Half-words reached my ears, but thankfully their backs blocked the view of what was causing the sound. When one figure detached from its little group approaching me, I let my lantern focus pass and reach the wall beyond it, my eyes following suit to the white gesso and tiles, still humming and intently not looking. Alex took the chance to sneak up ahead while the thing was distracted inspecting me, and Angie followed suit. I had to endure the scrutiny until they reached the patio's opposite edge. Once again, I tried to not frown at the smell, to not react when it came close and prodded around me. I took in small, slow breaths and forced myself to pay it no heed, keeping my face straight as I walked past the figure. I told myself I could not see the multitude of eyes staring behind its metal mask, that I could not see it or the circle of angels to the side, nor what they were eating. I told myself it was not Sister Bridget. I regrouped with Angie and Alex, and we carried on. The angels didn't follow. I can understand why we're always understaffed here. I'm strong enough to choke hold a Grigori, but any higher ranks are tough to deal with. Just finding someone with the qualifications to survive the job is already hard, and a year ago, I wouldn't have ever dreamed of one walking into the eating areas. But there's no point to keeping a record for this if no one else understands what I'm talking about, so let's rewind things a bit. In my first memory of Greenhaven, I think I was about 7. I'm sure I was there before, since it's the only big hospital in town, and I was one of those Spitfire kids who can't spend a week without getting a new scratch or bruise from playing and falling around. But this is the first time I remember being there. I didn't fully understand what was going on, but I felt sick. I remember just sitting there, morose, and playing with some toys while the doctor talked to my parents. Then he said a new word. I didn't really catch the weight or implications it would have in my life, but even back then, I knew that was the name of the thing that made me feel so weak and nauseated I couldn't play during breaks at school anymore, making my bones ache and not letting me sleep at night. It was the thing that made my dad pack our things into a big bag and move us to a room in the hospital, and what made my mom cry when she thought I wasn't looking, sobbing that she wasn't ready to stop being a mom. At that time, I didn't fear any monsters under the bed or crammed in the closet. Instead, my monster lived inside me, and it was called cancer. The patient in the room next to mine was a girl around my age. She had the largest honey brown eyes, soft freckled cheeks, and bewilderingly light hair cascading down her shoulders. She was adorable and sweet, and the complete opposite of me. I thought I understood why the nurses called her Angie. Most of my time not spent in treatment or sleeping was filled by me and Angie sitting in the kids' play area, watching TV together or stacking Legos atop the low table. "I met a princess yesterday," she said, whispering like she was telling a secret. When she leaned over, the marks under her eyes seemed even darker than usual. "Do you want to see her too? She's really pretty." I was there for chemo. Angie was there due to severe insomnia, coupled with crippling nightmares anytime she did sleep. And by that point, she'd been there for 2 years. I didn't know how she didn't go crazy yet. "Lori, do you want to see her too? I can take you," she pressed. "Princesses don't exist," I grumbled. "Not like in stories. Dad says the queen might visit if we live past 100, but a fairy tale princess wouldn't be here." I felt bad as soon as the words had left my mouth, and Angie's excited smile vanished. In my defense, I was a child, and social skills were even less my forte than they are nowadays. It's not a good defense, I know, but it's true. "You think I'm lying?" "I mean, look, I stammered, trying to fix my screw-up. "If fairy tales were real, we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't be sick. There would be a witch to learn a spell from, or a hero who would travel the world and bring a cure. My mom wouldn't be crying. Your mom would be here. Barney would be a real dino." "I'm not lying. I met her. She's magic. She granted me a wish," she cried. I don't quite remember the hours following that, other than agreeing to let her introduce me to this supposed magic princess she'd met. Half of me was skeptical, while the other half was wary. If she did meet someone that wasn't family or the hospital staff, then who was it? In the back of my mind, I wondered if I should tell an adult. But in the front of my mind, I just wanted her to stop crying. By the time afternoon turned into evening, I had all but forgotten about that earlier conversation and went to sleep, which may have been a mistake since it resulted in Angie coming into my room and waking me up by belly flopping on me. The action expelled all the air from my lungs, so instead of screaming and waking anyone, I just made a weird squeaky toy noise. Lucky us, I guess. She pulled me by the hand, and we tiptoed down the hall. On technical terms, Greenhaven is a hospital and mental health research institute located in the British countryside. In practical terms, it's nestled at the rear of a tiny town in the middle of bloody nowhere. The complex is old, and it shows on the walls, with tall ceilings and vintage windows. While most of the facilities have been through reforms to match modern safety and technological standards, there are sections here and there that were just closed to the public and left gathering dust, mainly at the center back of the hospital, which faces the town's cemetery. That's where Angie guided me to, still stopping at every intersection and carefully peeking in before tittering and skipping ahead with me in tow. I didn't see the point of her doing it. No one had been around there in ages. No patients or hospital staff to sneak by. Our steps left little footprints and raised puffs of dust as we walked. Are we there yet? Almost. Come on. Quick, quick, quick. I never understood what Angie liked about in this area, and its neighboring a cemetery of all things didn't help. No matter how beautiful a garden, any feels-good imagery it had got spoiled for me when I spotted the dark iron gates and old tombstones in the distance. I guess I should be thankful she didn't drag me into the actual cemetery. Instead, we took the stairs down to the ground floor and turned left, heading toward a small patio. Angie let go of my hand when we got there, and I took a moment to catch my breath, so I lost sight of her for a little bit. In the time it took me to get some air and look around, she had already crossed half the patio ahead while running along the lights. Most of the hospital facilities were lit by fluorescent lamps during the evenings. In comparison, those around us here were dim, silvery wisps, but I had thought the little orbs on our way had been part of the illumination too, maybe some sort of emergency lights. My feeling of strangeness intensified when they started floating away, fluttering ahead of me. They eventually moved toward the figure of a white woman in a white tunic with lace trim, like a camisole my grandma might have worn, and wearing a wreath of dried flowers atop her long, long hair. From afar, I thought she was a statue or mannequin of sorts. At least, until she moved. "Lucy!" "Hello, Angelica. Good evening." The woman greeted, arms rising to catch Angie as she dove in for a hug. When I say this lady was white, I don't mean Caucasian. I mean white like plaster, porcelain, or wax, without a single tint of pink or any fleshy hue. I could almost hear a clink of china when she moved. Her eyes were so pale they seemed made of glass, and her voice half came from her lips and half chimed in my head like an echo. It made me a tad dazed. I agreed with Angie on one thing, however. In this strange, unearthly way, she was the prettiest girl I'd ever seen. "I see you've brought a friend with you." She chuckled as Angie nodded without leaving the hug, latched onto her dress. I stood in my spot a few meters behind, frozen in place and gulping as the woman turned her attention to me. Hello?" I stuttered. "Hello, little one." I swallowed the urge to inform her I was not little and still growing. Here. I promise I won't bite." I swear by then my parents had properly stuffed the whole stranger danger thing into my head already, and I was also old enough to not just run towards some random person I didn't know. But that's exactly what I did. I don't know why. There was something about her, about that calm, soothing voice, and this fairy-like lady the color of moonlight just sitting in the garden, and I walked straight up to her outstretched hand. She inspected my face up close, her hand light under my chin. I remember thinking her fingers were a little cold. "What's your name?" "Laurel." "That's a pretty name. Nice to meet you, Laurel." She smiled. "So, what can I do for you?" What?" "Child, no one comes to me for no reason anymore. There must be something that you want. What is it?" That sounded depressing, to be honest, but I didn't tell her that. "Can I ask for anything?" She nodded. Anything. Angie giggled from her seat on the pale woman's lap, eagerly waiting to hear my wish as well. I thought of asking to be pretty, like a princess, to be rich, with all the new toys and candy I could ever want, to be healthy and not live in a hospital anymore. But maybe I needed to be reasonable, ask for something small. I asked for something to help me when the pain and nausea weren't letting me sleep. So she sung me a lullaby, Lucy's song, her song. The lines she sung were different from the ones I knew, and it didn't sound creepy when she was the one singing it. Just quiet and a little sad. I can faintly recall something wet dripping down my cheeks as I closed my eyes, and my still dazed brain wondered if a drizzle had started or if I was crying. It may disappoint you, but my first encounter with the inhuman didn't include ritual sacrifices, sulfur, or hellfire. When I opened my eyes again, it was the following morning. I woke up on my hospital bed, feeling well and more rested than I had been in a long while. Angie was somehow also on my bed, draped over my belly and snoring peacefully. The second wish I made was after my father died. Heart attack. It was sudden. He wasn't even sick that we knew of. His death hurt more than the cancer. I got along well with both my parents, but I'd always been Daddy's little girl. He was the stay-at-home parent while my mom was out working, the one who always arrived first in my room when I was little and had nightmares. The one who pushed the couches around and built blanket forts, and even as I entered my teen years, he was the one who picked me up from school and made lame jokes on the ride home. So there I was, 16 and grieving and terribly depressed, humming myself to sleep every night because all I could do otherwise was cry. That's when I had the thought of visiting Angie. In hindsight, I feel bad about it. Ever since I was declared cancer-free, I had not seen Angie even once. I didn't even have her added on Facebook. It's not like we had a fight or anything, it's just that hospital had taken over a year of my life. I didn't want anything to do with it anymore. I was fine. I was free. But she wasn't. Angie was tethered to Greenhaven, and she might be for the rest of her life. So, in an immature and, quite frankly, cruel decision, I walked away and abandoned her. But there was something from that time that I didn't leave behind. My wish. The song the pale woman gave me. Even then I carried it with me through the evenings, helping me fall asleep and rest when the pain of my loss was too great. It never failed. And now I wanted more.